everybody, and we have a very interesting episode of Dojo Talks today. Basically, we have some debates going on, and really it centers around the question, should people, let's call them club players, play different openings than more advanced or pro players? And I'm in the minority opinion. I basically think there's not much of a distinction there to be made. But I'm joined by three players who do believe that. I am Kostya Kavutsky, David Prus, and joining us today, a friend of Dojo Talks in the channel, Eugene Perelshteyn, GM Eugene Perelshteyn. So,
hey guys.
Hi everybody. And I'll tell you what, Eugene, I feel like you might be the strongest voice for there being a difference between, club openings and let's call them professional openings. So maybe you could start by just drawing that out a little bit, and then I'll try to come back at this. And by the way, I just want to say, I do have my kind of opinions on this, but I feel like since I'm the minority opinion, I am really going to try to be open-minded about this today. All right, Eugene, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again for having me on the show, guys. Since I wrote a couple books on the openings and have been analyzing and teaching openings pretty much for the past 20 plus years, I have a very strong opinion. For different levels of chess, there should be different openings. So if you have the same repertoire, let's say as Garry Kasparov at his peak, playing the main lines, the sharpest lines, and you're just starting out in chess, you're a club player, anywhere between, 1200, 1800, I'm not so sure if that's the right approach. First of all, that's a lot of memorization, especially if you're playing heavy mainline theory. And that's not the approach I like. I like concept-based approach. And as a matter of fact, as I was preparing for the show, I looked at a couple of younger players' repertoires. For example, when Vlad Kramnik was young, did you guys know what he played as white? What his main repertoire was against Sicilian?
He played the King's Indian Attack, right?
Nope, he played the Grand Prix before I even
Oh,
wrote
excuse
a book
me.
on it.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
The Grand Prix.
Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Grand Prix attack in the Sicilian. Very interesting, right? Maybe just coincidence that he chose that. Maybe his coach made him play it.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't think of Kramnik as a Grand Prix attack player. He's more of a knight of 3c4 specialist, right? So as he got better in chess, as his style evolved, he became a knight of 3c4. And then later in his life, right, after he became the ex-world champion, he started playing crazy e4 lines. And he's like, I just want to be an artist now. So I do feel like chess openings, you really have to find the right match, which is not so easy. But for every level, every chess personality, or even your approach to chess, like if you only have a couple hours a week to study chess, you really need to think about how to use that time properly, and playing openings that are concept-based, which is easy to learn, such as maybe the London system or King's Indian Attack, may actually be better than playing some mainline E4, D4 stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do you guys want to buttress that argument before I try to fight it?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll say it was surprising that we had this disagreement in the first place because I think to a lot of people, it feels very intuitive that certain openings are going to be like more suitable for players like developing and trying to improve. And then certain openings are, well, virtually all openings are suitable for what we would call like a professional player, someone who's been playing chess for many years, has seen a lot of different positions, has seen a ton of different openings, and can now kind of expand and explore a lot of different ideas. Like I switched up my openings a couple of times when I was like 22, 2300, and I felt like it wasn't like this incredible undertaking. It was just a matter of like learning a couple of new positions. I already had some experience, and I felt like I could be a lot more flexible in the positions I choose. Whereas I feel like when you suggest openings for new players, there's kind of like, well, there's kind of two things they're always asking. Number one, like what's the best opening, or like what's what are the best openings that I should choose from? And number two, what are the best openings that are going to help me develop as a player? Like, which openings should I play in order to kind of maximize my chess improvement and get myself into the right kinds of positions? Because we all know, and I don't think anyone is going to be recommending tricky and like trappy openings. We all know you can score a lot of wins with those, but that they're not going to be great for like your overall chess development. So it's always kind of like balancing those two things: openings that are objectively sound and solid, and openings that are good for like developing your middle game skills.
All right, I'll jump in with 2 cents. I think that what openings you play depends very much per player. And it depends on whether you want short-term results or long-term results. That's going to be different, right? So if you're just looking to do really well short-term, you should play the same opening again and again and again. And that opening should be an opening that's tailored towards your strengths. If on the other hand, you wanted to get good long-term, it might make sense to pick an opening that's tailored towards your weaknesses and try and, expand what you know. So I think for every single player at every different stage in their development and different goals, the answer is going to be totally different. Me personally, as somebody who looks towards long-term learning and mostly takes on students who are looking towards long-term learning, I recommend to them not to pick an opening, but to play every opening. And I think that that is best for long-term learning, is to play every single opening, not just to pick one opening that matches your weaknesses or your strengths or something like that. So from that standpoint, I don't think there is a better opening or a worse opening. You just have to go through all of them to eventually, be somebody who's comfortable all over the chessboard.
Okay, yeah. I can tell I'm the minority opinion, and it was funny because I was even surprised we're having the argument. Okay, let me try to defend where I'm coming from. And the first thing, I think, important difference probably between myself and the rest of the people on this panel is that I've, in general, I think see openings as being less significant as the other three people here. So, for example, me and Kostya had an interesting argument once, just like intuitively, and you ask yourself, well, how many points would it be worth if you could inject somebody with a high-level opening repertoire? You just stick him with a needle and inject him. And Kostya said something big, like 250. And I was like, 250? You're out of your mind. And my intuition was just much less. On this particular point, so I think that's important to think about with this particular point. And so I want to just relate two coaching experiences I've had over the years. I've had a number of people write to me asking for lessons, and many of them say, "Oh, I've been experimenting with this opening, and I need help with this, and yada yada." And honestly, I usually write back to them with like, "Okay, well, look, but I'm kind of doubtful that that's actually your problem." I'm kind of doubtful. And honestly, it kind of sounds like I'm gaslighting them, right? Like they've come to me with a problem. I'm like, no, that's not actually your problem. And in general, that's my experience. We'll go over some of their games, and there'll be just some basic things about chess understanding that are way more important, that have nothing to do with the opening, that are just much bigger obstacles, I think, for their chess improvement. We had an epiphany, I guess, on this particular issue. Well, let me say one more thing before I get to my epiphany. These people who come to me often already have played several openings. And what I find is people will generally play through a bunch of openings in their chess career until they kind of hit one that they feel comfortable with, whether that's a 1200 player or a GM. They'll settle into an opening, and they'll stick there once they become comfortable with it. It suits their style. And I really think that that's the kind of thing that I want them to have, is I want them to have some opening they feel good about. And then when we start reviewing the games, I want to be like, okay, we're going to look at this opening and the games you played with this opening so you can develop your understanding with this opening. And sometimes it's the London, sometimes it's some aggressive, crazy opening. Okay, finally, my epiphany. I apologize for talking too long. I have a student who is young, but is definitely not a big studier. You know, he's not going to be studying loads of theory. And he wanted to do what I think is the most theory intensive of all the openings, which is like playing the King's Indian as black and the Najdorf as, against e4. So King's Indian versus d4, Najdorf against e4. And those to me feel always like the most theory intensive. But what we did is we just went over a bunch of Fischer games and some Kasparov games, and he got the concepts. And for his level, which started off around 1700 and now I feel he's at 2200, it's fine. It's fine. And honestly, some of his misunderstandings with theory work out to his advantage because he'll just make some weird move and his opponents don't know what to do with it anyway. And at that level, 17, 2200, unless you're playing Mitch Fabian, you're not going to be playing guys who know some deep theory anyway. Or if you make a little slip in the theory, they're not going to punish you. So I'm just saying, to me, the fact that he chose those openings, which to my mind would have been the most theoretical openings, did not impinge his progress at all. And he has developed, I think, really good conceptual understanding of those openings. Okay, so that's my pitch. That's why I think we had this argument. I don't feel like there's a huge difference between openings for pros and the plebs or the peasants.
Yeah, I guess ultimately, I mean, I think we would all agree that finding the right opening for you is going to be much more valuable than choosing the top openings we come up with today. So it's all a little bit moot, but at least we can give suggestions and maybe people can take something useful out of it.
Right, and I'm going to share the second scene where we were talking about it. So I got this lined up, and so we're going to list these different opening categories, and then I think by doing so, it'll help me understand where you guys are coming from when you differentiate those two kinds of openings, and you can talk a little bit about why you feel that way, about, the distinction between the pros and the peasants.
Cool. That's a great scene.
Okay. Well, you guys want to start, or you want to say any other general remarks before we go on?
Well, let's start.
Okay. Should we start with the plebs or the pros? What do you think?
Let's start with the pros.
Either one
Okay.
for me.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I was going to go up.
It's on the left of your screen, and then you get to say what the sort of like A+ or S tier openings are, and then if for some reason you don't think that plebs should play them, then you get to sort of like explain your argument for differentiating at that
Sounds
point.
good. Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it.
Eugene, why don't you take us off first?
All right, so let me make sure I have all the openings here.
So we're starting with number 5, right? So our 5th best opening.
Okay,
for
yeah,
pros.
I like it.
Cool. And did we say how we're defining pros? Because I think we might have different.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, pro is somebody who is probably at least GM and maybe like an active tournament player. Maybe I'm like shooting too high there.
Yeah. What about people who are like 2200 but very ambitious? They want to they basically want to become professional players.
I see. Yeah, yeah. Like for example, like a young kid who is like extremely ambitious, but he's still like on 2200 range, and he wants to. Yeah, that I can see that.
Okay.
So basically, if you have a lot of time to study chess, that's a pro.
Yeah. Okay.
Have
Yeah.
about an hour a day or an hour a week. That's not a pro,
Okay.
right? I think that's a good. So the more time you have, the better. So let me think. So we're starting from the
bottom.
5th is the worst or the best?
Well, you're going to give I guess, your 5 openings that suit a pro's professional development.
Like your top 5.
Yeah, your
Top 5. Okay, got it. So
Yeah, I can start with number 5 if you want just a little bit of time
I
to
can
think.
start. I can
Okay,
start.
cool.
So let's say I am a professional chess player, and I can easily put myself in that category. I used to be playing a lot, and I need to prepare for a tournament, right? So if I were to play in a closed tournament, like a round robin or an open tournament, that would actually be a little bit different. But let's just say I'm just gonna play against people who are like 2,500 plus on average. So I definitely want a super solid opening as black. I'll probably play either e5, e4, e5 as black, or e4, c6 right now, the Caro. I feel like those are solid openings. And within the e4, e5 camp, I'll play the Berlin. I know everybody hates the Berlin, but I think objectively it's the best opening. You know, if you're playing, because most of the top players are not gonna go into some drawish line. They're probably gonna go into a sideline, and sidelines are great. Lots of interest in chess. So definitely Berlin is there as e4, e5. As boring as it sounds to a lot of people, the alternative is the interesting approach using the Marshall gambit, also e4, e5, but a little bit sharper, a little bit more memorization theory heavy, but I think it's completely sound. It's in that same category as the Berlin, also e4, e5 opening. I would even put it next to the Berlin. I feel like it's in the same.
Oh no, those are different openings,
mindset.
buddy. Those are different openings.
I know, but it's the mindset, right? Marshalls and Berlin. But okay.
I have them as different. They're different.
Yeah.
For me.
They're different. All right. And then let's see. So that's e4, e5. Well, obviously I have to know all the other e4, e5, but let's just leave it as that. And against d4, I would say the Grunfeld. Because the Grunfeld is right now what's giving a lot of people headache at the top. There's no one main line. The drawback of the Grunfeld, as a pro player, I have to know the sidelines really well and all the nuances and transpositions and all that stuff. I think that's definitely up there as a Grunfeld. And the alternative to the Grunfeld, if I don't want to do a lot of memorization, I want something super solid, is the Queen's Gambit declined. Although nothing wrong with the Queen's Gambit accepted, neither the movie nor the opening. But I'll go with the Queen's Gambit declined.
Wait, sorry guys, shouldn't we separate between e4 and d4 or
d4? I think so. I think we should make one list for like e4 and one for d4/c4.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah.
So we're talking about which ones right now?
I think just e4.
Sorry. Okay. So let's leave Grunfeld for the d4 against d4 chapter. All right. So against e4, then instead of the Grunfeld, let's put Caro-Kann. Right now, super solid and has some really interesting fighting built in there. And let's see what else.
So you would have the Caro-Kann above the Marshall?
No. His e5 repertoire is number one, I think.
Yeah, e5 is number one. Number two is the c6 repertoire, which is the Caro-Kann. And number three, I would probably choose the Najdorf.
Okay, so this is a little complicated. I'm going to move these around here a little bit. So we're going to put Berlin at like the top.
Yeah.
All right, Marshall.
Berlin, Marshall, Caro.
I see.
Najdorf.
Yeah. Let's rank them. Yeah, in that way. Yep. Caro, number three, and then Najdorf, number four.
Oh, Najdorf, number four. Okay.
All right, and I have one more, right? Let me think. Berlin, Marshall, Caro, Najdorf, Sveshnikov.
Okay.
That's an opening. So yeah, let me address some of the questions in the chat. Like when you play e4, e5, and your opponent plays a Rui Lopez, you do have to choose between one of the options because there's a lot. There's the Berlin, there's the Marshall, and then there's several others. There's like the Open Spanish, the Archangel, tons and tons of other lines. So it's not enough just to say like, oh, you play e4, e5 because that's not really the whole story.
Right.
You're gonna have to
Rui
choose.
Lopez is like the family of openings.
Yeah, it's like you can't just say you play the Sicilian. Like you got to choose a Sicilian.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Rui Lopez is like the Sicilian. Exactly. Yeah. So here's my list. Berlin, Marshall, super solid, extremely strong reputation. Most people don't go for the main lines as much these days. And sidelines are fine. Lots of interesting chess. Caro is very interesting, especially like the knight f6 lines, knight takes f6 ef. Magnus has played a couple of times. I like those positions. Najdorf is just one of those openings that withstood the test of time. Kasparov, I don't know who else. Kasparov, I can say. Fischer played the Najdorf. Everyone plays the Najdorf at some point. Nepomniachtchi is playing the Najdorf, I think, religiously these days. For sharp players, I think Najdorf is a great choice. Lots of theory, of course. And Sveshnikov is an interesting choice. This opening was, I think, taboo, right? Terrible opening for many, many years. And then kind of Sveshnikov, I don't know if Sveshnikov himself resurrected it or if other top players started playing it, like Kramnik played it in the 90s. And now Magnus, of course, played it with great success in his match against Fabi. Right. So I think Sveshnikov, and then, of course, Gelfand. Again, the biggest surprise to me is Gelfand. He came up with the Sveshnikov and the Grunfeld, the two openings he's never played before in his life, against Vishy Anand for the World Championship, guys. The guy, all his life, played out other openings, and for the World Championship, he completely changed his repertoire. And he played the Sveshnikov and the Grunfeld. That, to me, is a pretty strong endorsement for the Sveshnikov.
And the same thing can be said for Carlsen, right? That he played the Sveshnikov against Caruana. It's kind of the same.
Absolutely correct.
Situation.
Same mentality. Yeah.
Like you're right into a World Championship match, and suddenly the Sveshnikov is the opening.
Yep. So
Okay,
that's my
cool.
5.
All right, that was
against
cool.
E4.
Not many arguments there.
All right.
To be had from my list. I'll give you my list since it's basically the same as Eugene's, so it'll go fast.
Okay.
I put first 1E5, and I had in mind the Marshall, the Berlin, or obviously your opponent can play the anti-Marshall. You can play multiple variations of the closed Berlin. There are several that are acceptable. So I have 1E5. I don't know if you want me to split it into more than that, but then I think the Sicilians, the second best to E4. And out of the Sicilians, I would pick the Sveshnikov or the Najdorf as being the top 2 Sicilians. After that, I would still say there are several other Sicilians I would recommend above the Caro or the French.
So okay, yeah, which one after Sveshnikov then?
So actually, I mean, for me, you could maybe write something like Marshall, Berlin, Sveshnikov, Najdorf, and then other Sicilians. But
so
if I were to go beyond that, Caro-Kann is my next opening. So if we were only going by first move, it would go E5, C5, C6. So if you want to leave out the other Sicilians line, you can put Caro at number 5 for me.
Okay, so Caro at 5 and then Berlin at number 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, very similar.
All right, Kostya, what do you got, buddy?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, my thinking was very similar to Eugene's and David's. I struggled between the Berlin and the Marshall. I recognize that, of course, lots of people have their preferences, and people are mentioning the Petrov as another like super solid opening. From my perspective, it seems like there aren't as many takers for the Petrov compared to the Berlin and the Marshall. So these were just the top 2 choices for me. I put Berlin number 1. I just feel like it's been like the top dog since, let's say, 2000 with Kramnik. It's basically part of everyone's repertoire at some point, like Carlsen, Aronian, Kramnik, and Caruana. Like almost everyone is playing it. Not necessarily everyone plays the Marshall, even though it seems like theoretically the Marshall right now is also standing very well. So I put Marshall number 2. Seems like it's just going to be the most solid kind of world champion level opening. My third choice is the Sveshnikov, because I felt like, okay, first Gelfand, like Eugene was saying, and then Magnus just kind of showed it's playable at the absolute highest levels. You can have the best team in the world on the other side prepping against you, and I mean, it totally holds up. So I would say maybe it would have been higher, but I guess the Sveshnikov isn't for everyone, because you have to be willing to play those extremely dynamic positions. And then I put Najdorf number 4. Najdorf has just been super solid for many, many years. MVL's playing it, all the time. It's part of everyone else's repertoire at some point as well. I think lately it hasn't been. I don't want to say it hasn't been like as solid as the Sveshnikov, but lately I just feel like the Sveshnikov has done better.
Okay. All right, guys, listen up. We got to reboot. We got to reboot because Zoom hurt us. Zoom killed us, and Kostya is going to reboot this, and we're going to restart it. All right, Kostya. Here we go. And we're just going to reboot this, guys. It will just take a second. And there we go. Yeah. All right.
We're back.
We're back. Yeah. So we're back. And yeah, you know what? Let's just go back to this other scene here and we can continue ranking things out. We'll grab the pictures of everybody in there. We we tried to test the limits of Zoom and we got burned, but we fixed our problems pretty quickly. Kostya, what did you say was number 5?
I don't think I got to it, but
okay.
For me, my number 5 choice was the Kero, mainly because I think it's actually, it seems like a pretty decent surprise weapon, or at least it seems like what a lot of these top guys turn to when they're looking for an opening that is, just not going to be as deeply explored as some of the other options, and it can just be a little bit of a surprise. So it seems like a good choice to have in your repertoire, especially if, let's say, the opponent is only playing the advanced variation. You always know you're going to get like a pretty fighting game there. So that seems like a good choice to me for the pros.
Okay. And like I said, I don't see any big difference between these two categories of pros and peasants. But just in terms of sound openings, if I could call it that, what I would add as my 2 cents to all this is that in my lifetime, E4, E5 has just evolved into a very solid thing that's very hard to take down for the white player, especially with the evolution of first the Marshall in the 90s with, I feel like, Mickey Adams developing that. And then the Berlin, of course, with Kramnik. And it just made E4 so impotent looking. And now the systems against E5 are these very piano, soft, Magnus Carlsen, almost London-like buildups that don't have Fischer's C3, D4 involved in them, you know. So I think that's been a big change in my lifetime. And the Petrov, with, say, Fabi and other people playing the Petrov, absolutely needs to be mentioned. Also, I think great opening at a lower level. So I would say, in terms of this ranking, that Berlin, Marshall, Petrov, definitely not the Caro, guys. Oh, no, don't be playing that. Don't be playing it as a peasant either. And then I would say Najdorf, and then something like Sveshnikov. I actually think the Dragon, especially Eugene's accelerated Dragon, could be played both at the peasant and the pro level. Is a very solid opening too. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now I'm interested. Now you guys are going to differentiate for me what you think is good for the peasant level and why. Yeah, so it'll be
absolutely
fun. Okay. Well, Eugene, why don't you go first?
All right. So the first thing, Sveshnikov has to be thrown out the window as quickly as possible for the peasant because you're going to get slaughtered.
Okay.
In theory, especially there's some sharp P sack on D5.
Right.
I mean, you're just going to get slaughtered, guys. You can't play the Sveshnikov unless you're Magnus Carlsen or a top player or Gelfand, right? Heavy memorization.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So definitely not the Sveshnikov. So let me actually, this is good. Let me, I want to explain my thought process why these openings should not be, and I'm going to recommend the openings for the club play, right?
Okay.
Najdorf, I actually think it's tenable. I think Najdorf has very rich ideas and very logical. As a matter of fact, move e4, c5, knight f3, like if you think of the open Sicilian that most players play, I think is actually very bad for a club player. Open Sicilian, you're making a huge commitment. You're giving up a central pawn. Strategically, you're worse. And let's just talk about if you play e4, c5, knight f3, I play a6, the O'Kelly opening. Have you guys heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
a6.
Kostya's an expert in that one.
If you play d4 after c d4, knight d4, you're already worse. At
Right.
least you're fighting for equality as well. That's why I feel like club players who play e4 and don't understand that, they already fight an uphill battle. So that's why I think c5 and the Najdorf is actually quite reasonable. And I'll put it on that list.
Okay,
Najdorf.
where would you like to put the Najdorf?
Put it like, I don't know. I haven't ranked them in my head, so let's put it on number 5 right now, and then
Okay.
we'll rank them later.
Sure.
So I think Najdorf and any kind of Sicilian can be played, but I'll talk more about details. Now let's talk about the dragon. I used to play the dragon when I was a kid with actually pretty good success.
Right.
And then I learned that the hard way after getting mated a few games by somebody who knows their theory, and I make one inaccuracy, that I should play the accelerated dragon. Now that's a great club opening. As a matter of fact, I have been playing the accelerated dragon as a grandmaster too, and I'm not afraid of the Marat bind, because that's sort of the grandmasters that are afraid of the Marat bind. That's why they don't play the dragon. But I think you could completely play the accelerated dragon and not be afraid. So that would be my number 4.
So just to be clear,
Again,
Eugene,
like
you think that with the accelerated dragon that at the pro level the Maraxi bind is just too intense?
Too one-sided, let's put it that way. Black has to just defend, and you don't really get any winning chances. You can say the same for the Berlin, right? But the problem in the Berlin, people play sidelines, so you actually get a lot of wins. Marshall too, people don't go into the Drosh line, whereas in the Marat bind is like de facto the line, right? So you kind of have to just accept it and sometimes make a draw as black, which is not bad.
Okay.
And maybe suffer a little bit, but that's normal. In Berlin and Marshall, sometimes you get to suffer a little bit too. But I think I agree with you. If you approach it in that matter, that it's okay to suffer a little bit as black, you can play against the Marat bind. You're just giving up a lot of space that you're not doing the same in the Berlin and the Marshall.
I mean, come on. It's got to be better than the Caro. Come on. You talk about suffering.
That's
Talk
true.
about suffering.
Yeah, there is some... I think the problem is Caro has a lot of fighting built in. And especially nowadays, the way like the advanced Caro is very fighting. The knight f6, knight takes, ef lines are super fighting. Whereas in the Marat bind, you don't really have a lot of winning chances unless you know your endgames really well and you can squeeze water from stone. Like Magnus would do pretty good with that. All right, so that's my
with every
number 4.
opening.
Yeah.
I don't know, number 4 or number 1. I don't know. I haven't ranked them in my head. So let's put it at number 4 for now. Number 3, what's a good club opening against e4? Caro is a little bit tricky because I think the advanced is going to be very difficult to handle for the club players. I think that's where everyone is hidden. And plus this h4 lines, the c4 lines, there's all this like sharp stuff these days. So I would not put Caro for the club player, even though it's completely fine opening. Probably the Scandinavian.
Oh, we're going to get some blowback there.
I feel like the Scandinavian is an improved Caro-Kann in some ways.
Yeah,
because you avoid the advance. Yeah, your queen goes and wastes a couple of tempi, but I don't think your club level opponent knows how to take advantage of 1 or 2 tempo losses.
Right.
You know your theory, right?
Seems right. Seems like a fair estimation. Not many club level players who use the initiative. Anytime you see it, you like take note. You're like, whoa, lady, your son uses the initiative.
So I feel like Scandi is somewhat of an improved Caro because there's a lot of sidelines. It's not well studied. And I prefer specifically Scandi with queen a5 because there's queen d6, queen d8,
Right.
queen a5, rock solid. Typically, you're not going to get mated.
Right.
Sometimes you give up the bishop pair. Sometimes you maybe lose a tempo or two, but the knight on c3 is misplaced. So I feel like it's okay. Scandi is okay for a club player. Okay, let's think. Marshall or Berlin? Marshall, unless you're Mitch.
Uh-huh.
So heavy memorization. No,
Yeah.
don't recommend that, guys. Sorry. Berlin, somehow I feel like it's too complicated for a club player. Berlin, too difficult, because you go right into the end game sometimes. You have to know it really well. I would not recommend the Berlin or the Marshall for the club player. So I would have to come up with two other openings. Let me think. I'm not a big fan of the French, even though it has, I know Jesse is a big fan of the French. I just feel like with that bishop on c8, you get your life sucked out of you. Don't like the French. I'm having a hard time with the other two. Let me think. What's a good club opening?
Let me use that, what you're thinking, to just chime in on this. I would, this is what I think. If I was going to differentiate between pro and peasant, my sense would be that openings where you have less space are going to hurt you more at the pro level than they are at the club level. That's the only differentiation. I'm willing to be like, oh, you might really get hurt more at the pro level. And I think that's something that's developing right now. Like, people are beginning to learn how to play with space at the pro level. And it takes a lot more skill to do that. But that being said, like, we'll talk about d4. I still think, King's Indian is the opening where you get the worst space disadvantage imaginable. But I still think it's totally playable at the pro level. Okay, that's just my 2 cents. Eugene, you don't have to do an opening. I don't know what you could say. You could say any number of things here.
Yeah, I want to fill in those two openings, but I'm having a hard time with what are the good club openings?
And let me say too, I feel like at the club level, I really don't think you need to know all those crazy Marshall lines. You just need to know a couple ideas, and you're going to be dangerous. I mean,
go ahead. The lion.
The lion. There we go, man.
You can just blitz out the first 5-6 moves, right, without thinking.
There you go.
Oh no, never blitz out moves without thinking.
The lion.
So it's the opening where it's kind of like the Philidor, right? The improved Philidor.
Yeah, it used to be called the Philidor until Simon Williams killed it and named it the Lion.
Yep. So I think I've seen a lot of people use it with success, even up to 2,000, 2,200.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Again, an example of space, of not having space.
Yeah. Let me think. What else? Now, there is this opening that's kind of like the mix between the Caro and the modern. I don't know what the proper name for that.
I think sometimes it's called the Gurganidze.
Maybe the Gurganidze is the right name for it.
Some people call
the line I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah, but some people call it the rat. That's what they call it.
The rat. Isn't that the rat? What's his name? Yasser Seyrvan's favorite opening when he was a kid.
We're getting a lot of animal names from you, buddy. Well, Eugene, man, I guess once you start seeing the animal names, it's not too good. We got 3 animals in there. Well, 2.5 with rat, lion, and dragon.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's not good.
Not good, buddy. Not good.
Not
but
good,
all right.
guys.
Well, we'll let you change it up if you want. How about that?
Well, let's leave it for now.
You can still rearrange,
you can still rearrange,
number 1, I'll put my accelerated dragon because I feel like it's much easier to learn than the Najdorf, for sure. Number 2, I'll put the Najdorf.
Okay.
I think it's quite interesting types of positions. Number 2, I'll leave Scandi as number 3.
Sure.
I'll put lion number 4 and the rat number 5.
All right.
So I think that's my order, guys.
Okay, that's pretty good.
And can we just clarify what's the move order on the rat?
Yeah, go ahead. Give us the move order of the rat.
So I would probably go with, let me think. E4, G6, D4, and then either C6. Yeah, probably C6 here.
C6, right.
and then either knight f3 or knight c3, and then either d5. You keep the bishop on f8 for now.
Right.
And then you try to get the light square bishop traded. Sometimes you even play d6. Don't play d5. Play d6, play bishop g4, trade the bishop on the knight, bishop g4, bishop takes f3. And then you basically play Caro-Kann style.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
So it's kind of a weird hybrid between all these openings, like the Caro, the modern, the perk, right? All that stuff.
Right.
Okay. Well, David, are you next, buddy?
Sure. Mine is pretty easy. It doesn't matter what opening you play. You just have to play them all. So there isn't an opening that's better or worse. As I said, it depends whether you're trying to win your games or get better in 2 years or 5 years or whatever. If you're trying to get better long-term, then the answer is you need to rotate through every single opening. I mean, you could play the Scandi as much as you want. If you play these openings from Eugene's list, like, you're never going to be a great player of the Berlin defense by playing, like, the Scandi and the Lion, or the Rat. So I think you just need to rotate through every opening if you're looking for long-term success. And if you're looking for short-term success, then the right opening for you is very individual. I can't guess it without seeing your own strengths and weaknesses. If you just want to win a tournament 1 month from now and want advice on what opening to play, I mean, it should be an opening that fits your style, not an opening that is relatively better or worse. And I do think that in general, what openings you play at the club level have almost no results, no impact statistically on the result. Like at the top levels, I think if you play the Berlin defense well, you do better than if you play the French defense well. But for a 1400, if you play the French well, or you play the Berlin well or the Najdorf well, I think it comes out the same. It just doesn't matter what opening you're playing at that level.
Okay.
So you can just write everything for me. I think everyone should be looking for long-term improvement. So we'll just say they need to play every single opening.
Okay, cool. All right, Kosi, what do you got, buddy?
Yeah, so I definitely hear what David's saying. I think it is beneficial to play different openings. But I don't know. I feel like most players, they just want to choose something, learn it, get comfortable with it, and then maybe they'll switch it up later. But for like a certain time frame, like 6 months, a year, maybe longer, they just want to be consistent. So my list for beginners. Okay, number 1, I'm going to put the Dragon.
Okay, good. Do you want me to write Accelerate, or do you want me to just write Dragon?
Just put Dragon, because actually I'm going to include both. I think if I could just mold a new player, and they leave their chess to me, I would have them play the regular Dragon. Because my feeling is that you want to play sharp openings when you're developing. I feel pretty strongly about this just based on my experience. I think it's much easier to teach positional chess to a sharp player than to teach a positional player how to be dynamic and be willing to take risk and sacrifice. You can do it, but I think it's easier to go from someone who knows how to attack and now has to rein it in a little bit than the other way around. And I mean, people are obviously free to disagree. That's just my experience. So
I would agree with that. I would put the Dragon there.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. There's this famous phrase, if you play the Caro-Kann when you're younger, what will you play when you're older, right? Because you're able to calculate as well. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And whenever I look at strong players, like best players of all time, or just 2700s, and I look through their game histories, what they played when they were 1800 or 2000, almost everyone plays the King's Indian at some point, or some version of that. Not everyone plays something like the Slav, but everyone plays some kind of really sharp King's Indian or modern. At some point, they kind of that's part of their repertoire. So the Dragon for me, if you're someone that really doesn't want to attack and you just want to be a solid player, then I would go with the Accelerated Dragon, because it's not quite as hectic. I think it's a lot more strategic than the Dragon, and so that's a good kind of choice. Number 2, Najdorf. I think Najdorf is just a good opening. I think a lot of players worry way too much about the theory. that they're not going to get hit with, because like most players just play anti-Sicilians nowadays anyway.
Very true.
So just go with Najdorf. I do feel strongly that the Sicilian is kind of like the best opening for developing players for many reasons. Like you just get exposed to a lot of interesting positions, but also in terms of like the quality of the positions you're going to get are pretty good, because like once you get some experience against the anti-Sicilians, you start to actually quite like enjoy them. Like as a Sicilian player, at first I was like annoyed by all these lines, but now like I'm happy when I see a C3 Sicilian. I'm happy when I see anything other than like the super sharp main lines. So if your opponents are not going to play critically against you and they're just going to play like normal Sicilian moves, then the Najdorf is great. Get the open C file and get that counterplay. Number 3, pretty similar in spirit. I went with the Khan. I think it's actually like kind of similar to the Najdorf in that you're playing like more of a hedgehog style, but Khan is like really, really hedgehog style. I wasn't sure about this one. I don't think it's for everybody, but I think it's an interesting opening to play, and it does teach you a lot about how to play against the space advantage, how to try to create counterplay on the queen side. To me, the Najdorf and Khan at this level are honestly just very similar, but I put that number 3. Okay, number 4, I'm just going with E4, E5. And against like the Ruy Lopez, basically anything, I think the Marshall is fine if you're a sharp player. I think it's actually white that has to know more theory in the Marshall if they want to just not lose in the opening. I have one student who has been playing the Marshall since he was, I think, maybe 15 to 1600. I showed him just some very, very basic ideas. And sometimes he just gets quick wins because his opponents make a mistake and they get checkmated. So I think the Marshall, like the actual Marshall gambit, is easier for black, but I'm totally fine with the Berlin. I think if you want to play something solid, then E4, E5, those positions are really, really good for development. And in 5th place, I went with the Caro-Kann. I think if you just want something super solid and you just want to play chess tomorrow and you've like never looked at an opening in your life, you could literally learn the Caro in like 30 minutes and you'll get a position, you can get your pieces out, and you can just play like normal, simple positional chess. I think the Caro is much, much better than the French in this regard, because in the French, you don't get your bishop out, in the Caro you do. And I think that just makes life a lot easier for peasants. So that's my list.
Okay, pretty good.
I would actually agree with that list. There was a funny story. I remember when I was a kid in Russia, we played in some team competition, and I've never played E5 in my life. And we knew who I was going to play. My opponent always plays into the main line of the Marshall. And I was prepared, by my coach to play into the Marshall, and I just checkmated the guy. And I've never played in my life.
Nice. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I agree. The Marshall's very easy to play for black.
Yeah, I think I'll just reiterate when all these peasant openings, like if you break down for somebody in 5 minutes what the opening is about, that's great, and they'll be able to develop their own sense of the opening as they're playing it. As long as they're going over their games, they will develop a pretty high level, ability in these openings. One thing I say from a pedagogical standpoint that's kind of interesting is like a lot of teachers are like, you got to play E5. There's just no way you can learn to be a chess player without playing E5. And I never played E5. And it was honestly, it's always felt, even though I think it's probably the best opening against E4, especially in the last 20 years, it's not the imbalance that I crave. I've always been more like the Sicilians, and the Frenches were just way more interesting because there's an imbalance there. Right, I just feel like that's an example of, just how you feel about stuff. Another dogmatic thing that we hear is that young kids should play aggressive, initiative-based chess, and I mostly agree with that, but it's also what they're good at. It's also what they want to do. They naturally crave that themselves. So, I think a lot of old guys come to me and they want to play the London, and I'm fine with that, dude. I'm fine. If you want to play the London, that's fine. All right, speaking of that, we should move on to D4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Maybe let's take a screenshot or something. So we don't
make sure we remember this.
Oh, yeah, take a
lose
screenshot.
this. And then you can wipe it or duplicate, whatever you want to do. I got it.
You got it. Okay. So I'm going to slowly be getting rid of, and I'll just Yeah. So who's gonna? Well, Eugene, why don't you go first, and I'll just be getting rid of your business, and I will
Yeah, for sure.
change it
So
up here.
again, going back to the story about Gelfand and how difficult it is to handle the Grunfeld, Kaspar with his peak played the Grunfeld. Definitely Grunfeld is my probably number one choice against d4.
Interesting.
But also you have to be in the same spirit as, you know, to play something sharp against e4. Like if you play the Grunfeld against d4 and then you play, let's say, the Berlin against e4, that doesn't really feel right. So if you play the Grunfeld, you probably want to play the Najdorf. So think of Nepomniachtchi, right?
Right.
Or MVL. Those are perfect examples. Extremely sharp tactical players who play the same repertoire all the time. Grunfelds and Najdorfs.
Right.
So yeah, that would be my number one. Grunfeld just too solid, not refuted, very sharp. But extremely heavy theoretical, lots of memorization. And there's no one main line anymore in the Grunfeld. You have to know everything, right? Pretty much any game is probably going to be sideline. All right, so number two, I would probably say, let me think. I would probably say the Queen's Gambit Decline, QGD. It's just the opening of World Champions, right? At every single World Chess Championship, there was probably at some point Queen's Gambit Decline happened. Although somehow Queen's Gambit Accepted didn't get the same reputation as Queen's Gambit Decline. I don't know why. I think QGA is completely fine. But historically, the most solid is the Queen's Gambit Decline.
And one thing I'll chime in on this is kind of interesting is one of the ways I can imagine being wrong about my opinion here was I played the Queen's Gambit Decline for a while and I got wasted by Jan Elvist, and he's like, no, this isn't the opening for you. You're not a specialist. You know, so the idea there was like Queen's Gambit Decline, there's so many things white can do, right? And if you really, really wanted to do it, you would have to be a master of all these weird sidelines that white can throw at you. Arguably, that's going to be true for any opening, but I can imagine it being especially true for something like the Queen's Gambit Decline.
Yep, and Jan Elvist, former number 3 in the world, he definitely has something to say.
That's right, yeah.
All right, so my number 3 would probably be the Slav. I feel like it's maybe gotten the reputation of boring opening. Nobody likes the Slav, but it's extremely rock solid. I like to pair it up with a Caro-Kann if I were playing the Slav. I think it's the same concept. Get the bishop out of the pawn chain. You're fighting for the center. Probably the worst that can happen, you'll give up the bishop pair, but you're still pretty solid. I think it's an easy opening, and I think both for a peasant and for a professional, but definitely Slav is there. All right, so we got Grunfeld, Queen's Gambit Decline, Slav. What else? Well, obviously Nimzo has to be there. As a matter of fact, probably Nimzo should be a little bit higher than the Slav and QGD, but it's hard to say. I'll just put Nimzo number 4.
Okay. Do you want me to put it like Nimzo / Queen's Indian?
QGD, yeah, because usually there's lots of transpositions.
Oh,
Obviously,
Queen's Gambit Declined. Oh, well,
Yeah.
okay. I'm
Yeah,
just gonna put Nimzo there.
Yeah, just put Nimzo. Obviously, white can play c4, knight f3, and that's a whole different chapter. But from a conceptual point of view, Nimzo can't be bad. And let's see, number 5 against d4. I'm tempted to put King's Indian in there.
Do it, buddy. Do it.
But I'm a little bit afraid because I feel like King's Indian is going to have a hard time at the top these days. Let me just think if there's anything besides King's Indian. I guess Semi-Slav is kind of like the Slav family. I can create a separate, like the whole Semi-Slav business with the Botvinniks and all this Moscows. That's a huge chapter. I think Sam Shanklin is a huge fan of that, of the Semi-Slav.
Okay, good.
Eugene, I'll just say you haven't yet officially put the QGA on your list if you're looking for.
If I had number 6, I'll play QGA. But I want to have a separate family. This at least introduces all the different families.
Okay.
QGA is kind of almost in the same family, although it's not. It's completely different positions as Queen's Gambit Decline.
Right.
But I'll leave it out.
Okay.
All right, Kosti, what do you got, buddy?
Okay. So for the pros against D4, I put Nimzo as number 1.
Uh-huh.
I think this opening has just been like ultra solid for many years. And I guess, we got to recognize it's not like a complete repertoire, of course, because they can go knight f3 on move 3. So I have the QGD as my number 2 choice. Kind of just goes like hand in hand with the Nimzo. Again, just like kind of picking the most solid openings that I can think of. Number 3, I chose the Slav. I think the Slav is also very, very solid. And just like rock solid for many, many years, world championship opening, etc. Number 4, I went with the Grunfeld. I feel like lately, actually, the Grunfeld has been a little bit on like shaky territory now that all these neural network engines think H4 is like a winning plan in every Grunfeld position. So I feel like the Grunfeld is on somewhat shaky territory. In fact, I feel like Svidler said something about the Grunfeld not being in great shape right now. But it has been, part of the repertoires of like so many top players that I think it still deserves to be on the list, and it's a very sharp opening. And then my number 5 choice, I would actually consider this a little bit of a surprise weapon at the pro level, would be the QGA. Because I think only like Caruana and maybe Dominguez are like the top guys playing it regularly. It's kind of like the Petrov of the D4 openings. Like not many people play it, but it seems to be really, really solid if it's like really well prepared. So that seems like a decent choice to me.
Okay, cool. All right, David, what do you got, buddy?
Unfortunately, no surprises here, really. So number 1 is the Nimzo. This is kind of coming from a place of instinct. Like I see the Nimzo played out and I'm like, well, that's got to be pretty pristine for black. Like they can easily play D5 or C5 at will. They're developing really quickly. They're going to have a position in the center. White has to wonder about his business with the doubled pawns. Not even sure how good the move C4 is right now. It's just, it's glorious. So I put it number 1. Number 2, I put the Queen's Gambit Declined Orthodox, which I think you can play through a Nimzo move order or through a 1D5 move order. It's fine either way. There's a million different lines black can try within it. It makes like some maybe tiny concession with your C8 bishop early on. There's something white could think about, but it seems to have held up over, 500 world championship games at this point. Number 3, I put the Grunfeld, which I hated when I was younger. I just thought, what a piece of trash. Please play this against me. I will take over the center and refer you to chess discoveries of the 1910s when people found out that, if you didn't have a pawn in the center, your position sucked. So I used to just, I loved it. When I was mostly playing E4, the Grunfeld was one of the first reasons I would play D4. If I saw somebody played the Grunfeld or the King's Indian, or, those were their 2 openings, I was like, I'm playing D4 against you tomorrow, buddy. So I used to think it was terrible. And then I finally, one day I just realized that it was fine. So Grunfeld, I put it number 3 here. I think it's a pretty good opening, pretty safe. Basically the point is you just get all your pieces out. And if white's got a little bit more center than you can counterattack it a little bit and it doesn't really matter. Then number 4, I put the Queen's Indian defense. Again, this is a little bit aesthetic for me, and it shows how good the Nimzo move order is maybe, because I think once you play the Nimzo move order, I think if you play the Nimzo, you're good. If you switch to a Queen's Gambit in a bunch of positions, you're good. If you want to play, the Queen's Indian, that opening looks really good to me. And honestly, if White plays something weird on move 3 other than Knight C3, you could even maybe play the horrible Benoni. But let's not mention that in a video about the best openings. So Queen's Indian defense, it has that same flexibility as the Nimzo. It's got that nice control over E4. So yeah, White's got some space, but they can't bowl you over. And so many, different angles you can attack White from. So there's even lines where you play Bishop A6 and then B5, right? Instead of D5 or C5. So I love it. Compact, few weaknesses, Najdorf-like in that way. And then on the final opening, I went back and forth like 5 or 6 times on my list. I've replaced Slav with semi-Slav and semi-Slav with Slav. Went back and forth a bunch of times. Right now it says semi-Slav. So you can put that down for my 5th. I don't think it's like markedly better than the Slav or anything. I have no idea. They're pretty close. They're both pretty good openings.
We got a question about
Maybe
the
A-.
About the Rogozin. I think the Rogozin's great. It hasn't been seen much recently, but the Rogozin's a beautiful thing. It often will transpose to some of these other openings. But yeah, great opening.
Yeah, I think we just kind of blanket included Rogozin, like Vienna, and the QGD bubble, because there's a lot of solid lines there.
I was definitely thinking of Vienna as being like an option in the QGD, and the Rogozin if we're saying the Queen's Gambit and the Nimzo, you would have to know some of the Rogozin positions by transposition at least.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. Now we're going to go to the next level. To the
peasants.
To the peasants. And
all right. I would have to say number 1 would be King's Indian.
Ooh.
Uh-huh.
Very easy to learn. You can play it against C4, D4, Knight F3. You can play it in various different forms. You can play the main line. You can play the Knight A6, E5 line, the one that I would prefer. It's probably you're probably gonna suffer. You're gonna probably lose a lot of games, but you're gonna have this beautiful winning attacks that is gonna be worth it. So I would put King's Indian Defense Kid as number 1. All right, number 2, probably the Nimzo Bogo combo. I would not play the Queen's Indian Defense.
Oh, interesting.
As a peasant. Only the Nimzo Bogo, they work kind of together. So let's put the Nimzo Bogo in there.
I did a video, by the way, called, I called it the Flamingo opening, which basically is a Nimzo Bogo. Very simple to understand. Get your bishop out. You're going to trade at least one piece off. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Very simple thing to understand.
Yeah, very easy to play. And that's, by the way, my black repertoire. We were debating with Ginger whether to do King's Indian or the Nimzo Bogo, because we didn't have any debate against E4. We definitely knew Accelerate Dragon is our choice. But we decided that King's Indian was too risky for certain club players. So we decided Nimzo Bogo is the easy choice. But King's Indian is definitely more, you get these more beautiful attacks, a little bit easier against different move orders. So I feel like Nimzo Bogo would be my number 2. Number 3, I would probably say, as a club player, I would probably say the Slav is kind of easy to play. And if you got the concepts right, get the bishop out, do the pawn triangle, I think you can play the Slav.
Oh, yeah.
Semi-Slav would be a different story. I will just do the Slav, yeah. All right, so let's see what else we got here. Now, let's go into some weird openings. So against D4, what would be a good club player opening that you can play against anyone? I would probably say the Dutch.
Oh, no. Man. The Dutch and the Rat. Oh, you guys. Oh, man. Eugene,
By the
to say
way,
the Dutch and the Rat.
Nakamura plays the Dutch with great success. Remember, he beat Jeffrey Jean in the U.S. Chess Championship, and he became the U.S. Chess Champion. I mean, Jeffrey Jean is no potser.
Uh-huh.
Neither's Naka.
Yeah.
And I think if Nakamura plays the Dutch against Jeffrey Jean in the U.S. Chess Championship, any club player can play the Dutch. That's just immediate stamp of approval.
Yeah, should we put Bon Cloud as number 5 for you, bud, or what's up next?
Once Nakamura plays the Bone Cloud in the actual over-the-board tournament, I will reconsider, but not until that happens. The Dutch is a very natural opening to play. I would even call the Dutch, like you can play the Stonewall.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great opening for club players. Botvinnik played the Stonewall. But it's the G6 Dutch and the Stonewall. I would go back and forth. You may even do Dutch, like Leningrad versus Stonewall in the same category. It really depends on your mood. But it's not the same. Obviously, one is G6, one is more like keeping the bishop on F8. But the concept is the same. Very easy to learn. So Dutch, maybe you can put Stonewall in the same list. And then number 5, let me think what would be a good one against D4. Number 5. I want to say the Benoni, but I'm probably going to get yelled at.
That's okay, buddy. You can do.
I'll put the Benoni. Because Benoni is a concept-based opening. Yes, we know how to refute it, but it's not super easy unless you are above 2,000. If you're under 2,000, I think you can play the Benoni.
One thing I want to say about the Benoni is really kind of practical, having to do with the peasants, is I have students who want to play the Benko and or the Benoni, and honestly, they're getting so many London systems and other weird stuff that there's like the work that you have to put in to do the Benoni or the Benko, it doesn't pay out because you never get to play it, you know? So it's this interesting thing that has to do with trends more than anything else, where, yeah, it's the Benko. If you play the Benko now, you're not going to get it that often. When me and Eugene were kids, every D4 player played C4 on move 2. You know?
Right.
But now it's just like, no, there's all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah, that's why I didn't put the Benko there, because you're never going to get the actual mainline Benko. Otherwise, I would put the Benko if you get the mainline Benko.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to play as black if you know the concepts.
Right. Okay, Kosti, what do you got?
Sure. David, were you going to interject with something?
I just wanted to make one point off what they were saying with everybody playing like the London, so you can't actually get the Benko. I mean, by that same token, you can't get the Nimzo, the Bogo, like any of these openings, right?
Right.
Even the Queen's Gambit declined, you can't get if your opponent's scared to move their C pawn past C3. So actually, I mean, I'm not especially recommending any opening over any other. As you see, like I will leave my play them all for D4 as well, of course. But I've been doing this, educational speed run like you recently, Kostya, but focused on trying to win the game within 20 moves as often as possible. So just trying to knock your opponent out in the opening. And against 1D4, I realized that I was going to get like 50% Londons or more. So I actually played the Leningrad Dutch, just like time after time, because it's an opening where your pawn's on D6 and white has like, and your plan is to play like H6, G5, right? Or E7, E5.
That's
so,
a good idea.
I mean, the King's Indian already does pretty well against the London, right? King's Indian does pretty well against the London. But if your pawn's on F5 and you've got an opponent who's playing a system and isn't even looking at your moves, then the Leningrad Dutch is basically like free F5, right? So I've been playing the Leningrad Dutch there, and I would say definitely if you know you're playing against some kind of system player who's going to give you some Dutch or Jobava Dutch or whatever, I mean, some kind of London or Jobava London or something like that, then the Leningrad Dutch, which Eugene had also mentioned, I think that's a great choice against those people just from a winning standpoint.
Cool.
Makes sense. But you would still stick to your opinion that they should just play all the openings.
You should just play all the openings. I mean, you can score better by playing the Leningrad Dutch in the short term, but you'll learn more by also playing everything else.
Gotcha.
And I'll just say, just because it's fun to debate these things, I don't think you should play them all. And I think, you should play it until you get kind of tired with it. And if you're playing one of these openings again and again and really reviewing your games, you'll get a deep understanding of the structures involved. And then that will be paid forward in your chess development. So that's just my 2 cents on that. All right, Kosta, what do you got, buddy?
Okay, so yeah, my list is again based on the openings that I think are just going to be best for one's improvement. I go back and forth on the top two, but given the fact that we do have to recognize that a lot of players moving up nowadays are just going to be facing the London. Even when I was moving up, it was kind of like just D4, C4, and then you chose your opening. Given that it's going to be half that and half London, I would put King's Indian number 1, just because the King's Indian is like a complete system that you can play against any D4 sideline. We haven't really mentioned this too much, but you can also play the King's Indian against the first move Knight f3 and first move C4.
Right.
Which some of these openings you would have to figure it out at some point. I don't think it's a big concern until you are actually somewhere in the range of like 2000, 2200, but because you're not going to be seeing that much Knight f3, C4 until then anyway. But it's nice that against like the London, you can just play the King's Indian, and the King's Indian I think is quite fun and dynamic against the London. So if you're someone that's like always like suffering against it, like, yeah, you can try the King's Indian and get a pretty fun and dynamic position. Okay, number 2, the Flamingo, or the Nimzo Bogo. Basically, Nimzo Indian, and in the off chance that your opponent doesn't allow it, whatever. Bishop B4 check. You can play Queen's Indian with B6. You can play D5. Actually, I think if you're like a really like a wild and kind of like tricky player, you could do the Nimzo and then pair that with the Benoni. I think that's actually totally reasonable. Some players just really like the Benoni and they're drawn to it, and it kind of suits them. And so I feel like they can absolutely play it and kind of work on their dynamic skills. My number 3 opening is the Slav. really matching Eugene for now. I think the Slav is super solid. And I would say this is the Karo Khan of D4. If you just want a solid opening, you can learn it in like one 15-minute YouTube video and get your pieces out. As long as you just don't bring your bishop from C8 too early, like you'll be fine in the Slav. That's like the only mistake you can really make. So I think that's a really solid opening. And it's also an opening that you can play basically until the GM level. Like it's just a very, very long-term opening. And I think all of these openings I was thinking about, like, what can you play for the long run, and you'll get good at it. You'll get good at playing these positions. It'll be good for your development. My number 4 choice is the Grunfeld. I think there is quite a bit of theory in the Grunfeld, and it's certainly not for everyone, but like if you start out playing it and you suffer with it a little bit, like if you suffer with the King's Indian a little bit, eventually you do learn how to play very sharp dynamic positions. You learn how to fight for queenside counterplay. You learn how to play against the space advantage. Like so many interesting dynamic and strategic themes in the Grunfeld. So I think there's lots of players who, played it growing up and became really strong masters, IMs, and GMs. I just think it's like overall very sound opening. And then my 5th choice, I'm going to go with the Benko. I know it's not a complete opening because you can literally avoid it with the first move Knight f3. So that's why I think otherwise it would be even higher on my list. I think you can do some stuff against the London. You can play like some C5, B5 stuff or some kind of Benoni hybrid. I just think the Benko is actually can be very overpowered at lower levels, especially if black is familiar with all the tricks and the tactics, like knight takes c4 and queen a5 and all this stuff. And white isn't, then I think black can have like a serious advantage, a practical advantage, just like knowing all the typical tricks. I think the same goes for a lot of the Sicilians that we talked about earlier, like the dragons and knight earths. If white is only seeing those like every once in a while and black is like super familiar with the tactics and the position, it can be a big practical advantage at the club level. So yeah, that's my list.
And I'm going to make fun of you guys a little bit here because you guys are, when you think about the difference between a pro level opening and a peasant opening, it has to do, in usually when we think about it, in terms of memorization and a lot of different lines and a deep understanding of different positions. And the King's Indian, to my mind, that's it right there. Memorization, all kinds of different methods of playing against you. Oh, man. Oh, man. So if that's your top opening for the peasants... Oh man, come on.
No, I think you just get used to it, and then you learn how to play that, and then one day you switch away from it. Yeah, QGD. No, I don't know. I think it's just like suffering. I think you're just like slightly worse, and you have like a bad light scored bishop in every single game, and yeah, I don't like it.
So you want people to play the King's Indian to learn to play actively from bad positions, so that they can eventually, when they become pros, play the Nimzo and QGD, never use any activity, and just sit there and get draws if they're ever able to switch.
No, not at all. I think when you switch from dynamic openings to more solid stuff, you bring all that stuff with you. And lots of positions in the Nimzo where you gotta play sharp, and you gotta be ready to attack. Like the F3 Nimzo, for example, Black has to be willing to just go all in and fight back. So yeah, I don't know. I think you gotta learn how to play with a fianchettoed bishop, and learn how to like attack and go all in.
Okay. Well, guys, should we wrap it up, or are we actually going to do openings for white, or are we going to save that for another time?
I think we saved that.
Yeah,
let's
that's a
save
huge
that.
chapter.
Huge chapter. All right, sounds good. Well, I'm going to switch scenes. We can get our pictures back here. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and I think people can both get some motivation for maybe different openings out there, and also hopefully it was interesting to just see different perspectives that we have on all these different approaches as coaches. Because you're looking at a bunch of people. We've done a lot of coaching between us guys. We've done a lot of coaching in different openings and stuff, and I think it's interesting too. I think a lot of people, I'm going to imagine, Eugene, when they come to you to be a coach, you're doing a lot of opening work with them, whereas they come to me, I'm usually like, no, we're not going to look at the opening, Yeah. So
Well, surprisingly enough, the way people study openings, it really bothers me, is that whenever I ask them why they play that move in the opening, they can't explain. They say, well, the book says so, or the Chessable course says so. And that to me is like how you're not supposed to play. It's like the exact opposite, because every move that you play, you have to understand. So when I teach them openings, I teach them chess. So, it's concept-based approach. It's, ideas behind the moves. That's kind of my attitude.
So you don't also own the URL chessopeningsmemorized.com?
Unfortunately, not yet, no.
That'd be a great site. Yeah, I feel like we all agree that it's really just about like learning the middle games, like whatever openings you play. It's like no one is assigning memorization homework to their students. Like memorize these lines and then come back to me and we'll check them. So it's all about like the ideas and learning on like just how to play good chess. But if you need something to choose, you need something to start out with, well, those were our suggestions.
Yeah. Maybe just as I advise people to try everything out from like a playing opening standpoint, I should try out like teaching different ways too. Like have a student just memorize a bunch of openings like you say, then have them spit out the lines, tell them if they were right or wrong, give them some more lines to memorize for the next week. Why not? Just try teaching badly, see what comes of it.
Well, I just feel like there's lots of like good options to try,
try out
before you try some of the crazy.
But this is an interesting experiment. Let's take somebody, I don't know, like Mitch, who as Jesse says, 2600, right, Jesse?
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's just say if we take Mitch and let's say I play some opening that I've never played in my life, but do you think I will survive the opening against Mitch?
No. You're done,
So
buddy.
this is a good test. I'm a grandmaster. So then the argument is memorization does work, right?
Well, right, and I just did this
No.
video about where Mitch gave me access to his Chessable account and the work that he's done there. And let me actually just tell this story about the King's Indian, and I think it'll help explain where a lot of amateur level players, and Mitch I think is going to be 2200 soon, but I think it shows where a lot of them are coming from and what they're doing, and I think will maybe blow Eugene's mind. Okay, so Eugene, Petronius had this 5-volume set, has a 5-volume set on the King's Indian. Right? Okay. Really detailed enough. So you think, when I think about like learning an opening and an investment of time, it's like, oh my God, 5 volumes.
That's a lot. Yeah.
And so Mitch, dude, he went into his Chessable account. First thing he did is he manually moved all the pieces on a chess-based file to get all of the moves from the Petronius book, all of them, all 5 volumes, into a chess-based file. Made that into a Chessable course for himself. Right? And then in the Chessable course, he has to do each move 3 times, and then 4 hours later, he's got to do it another time. Right? And then a couple days later, he's got to do it another time. So that's the way he's learning these variations. And I mean, that's a lot, right? That's a lot of work.
That's probably more time than I ever studied chess. Just the memorization alone.
That's what I'm saying, man. I mean, you have no chance against Mitch, buddy. You've got no chance.
Yeah, but I definitely don't think that was a good idea. I mean, those Petronius books are like Magnus doesn't know everything in that book. I mean, that's just like that was too much. I think it would be. I think what would happen though is Eugene would just find some like tricky move order. You know, he'd like lose a tempo, Queen A5, Queen C7, and then Mitch would do something weird, and then it would just be a game. and then the Grandmaster would come out. So.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good test. Maybe we should have some kind of a test like that. I don't know how to properly do this test where, like, you know, the understanding and the Grandmaster experience versus the actual hardcore knowledge and memorization.
Let's do it, dude. Let's have you play like some opening you normally don't play, and then we'll do a little mini match with you and Mitch, and me and David, our co-host, will do some commentary. That'd be fun.
I'd love to do
that.
that.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
If I get slaughtered, well, there you go.
There you go, right?
The modern chess is taken over, and
that's right.
You know, the approach of memorization refutes our, you know, good old school of chess.
And not only that, but I'll say I did play him a 10-minute game, and I was so scared. I was honestly so scared. I just played like B3 on move 1, and oh man, yeah, the terror that it strikes in a man's heart when you know that he's done all 5 volumes of Petronius. That's truly frightening.
But also, like, I am not one of those, like, people are saying Timur Gareev plays something like crazy anti-positional chess. Like, I can't make myself play bad moves. So that would be an interesting test. Like, I can't, like, if I know I can play A3 in move 1, right?
Yeah.
I'm just not going to do it because,
But
like, that means I am giving in.
Right.
That means he won. So I have to be more creative. I don't know where. But I don't know. That would be an interesting test.
All right, you guys, that's coming up. That match is coming up. Who's Mitch? You guys, go look at my latest video where Mitch let me behind the scenes of his Chessable account. I thought it was really enlightening about just what Chessable is, and I'm going to try to do a little bit. I'm never going to be at his level, but I am going to try to do a couple courses for myself and just taste that world. I'm going to just taste that world and see what it's like. All right, guys, we'll do another show soon based on our white recommendations. Hopefully we can get Eugene back for that. And we'll also do, probably on Twitter, we'll post an average of the two, of our different scores, you know, whether it was the pro opening or the amateur. All right. Any last words, guys, before we sign off?
Well, all I want to say is it's been fun.
Yeah.
Really, it's interesting how a lot of our choices for the pros are pretty much identical.
Right.
Even though we didn't agree on that beforehand, we didn't know who was going to choose what. The peasant choices rather are quite interesting. So I really enjoyed that. Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye, everybody.